I can tell some of you are struggling a little bit. We said the first thing you want to do when you encounter these problems is take care of the negative underneath the radical sign. What does the negative underneath the radical sign become? An I. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to change it into an I. I get rid of this negative, which is an I, and I get rid of this negative, which becomes an I.
Is that I outside of it?
It's outside of the radical sign, yeah. So now we have this, what's radical 3 and radical 4. I could put it right there. I just didn't know if I had room for both I's right there. It doesn't matter because you're multiplying all these together anyway.
Go in that term.
In that term.
Oh, right. So you don't have to break it down in like each.
It's per term. This right here simplifies. What's that? 2. So you get 2, then you have this radical 3 right here, which does not simplify, and then you have an I for the negative that was underneath that radical sign. Now I told you different textbooks, different professors, they might show it as 2I radical 3. That's okay. I don't care which way you do it. I can adjust to the way you see it. Plus, we look at the next term. We got rid of the I, or the negative underneath the radical sign, changed it to an I. What is the square root of 9? 3. And I take it times this 3 to give you 9. You have radical 2, and then you have this I right here, and this I right here, which is the same thing as I squared. You will. And what do we say I squared is the same thing as? -1. So then you have 9 radical 2. I squared was the same thing as -1. And then we get plus the square root of 16 is 4, but the negative underneath the radical sign changed it into 4I, plus the square root of 16, which is 4. This term right here, that I squared changes that sign. So you get, how many put the I in front of the radical? How many put it behind it? In front?
I in front. I feel like otherwise it's going to take forever.
So there's your answer. Those are not like terms. Well, these two are. I mean, you have stuff there that does happen to be like terms, but you can't combine the rational with the irrational part. So therefore, if you had this as a complex number and you were working on something in IXL, IXL would say put it in the format of A plus BI. If that were the case, what's A going to be? 4 minus 9 radical 2. There's the real part. What about the imaginary part? 4 plus 2 radical 3, and all of those are an I, the imaginary part. So they say where this right here is A, this is B, and then you have your I right there. That's what they say. I would accept, I mean, you're getting to this point, that's good. I just want you to make sure you see the difference. I'm not quite for sure a standardized test what format they would have it in. Somebody want to tell Wilson what I is? We talked about all these imaginary numbers. We said there's really only, how many do you have to know?
4.
You could know 4 if you want to memorize the pattern. Does anybody have those 4 down? No. I would memorize 2. What are the 2 that you need to memorize? If you see the square root of a negative number, that is I. I means the square root of -1. And then we have I squared. What's I squared the same thing as? -1. What's the highest power of I that you should have in an answer? Just I. Because if it's I squared, you can change it into -1. And then we talked about I could, because I noticed that this group, there's a group of 4 of them here. You go from I, -1, -I1, I, -1, -I1. It's just going to keep repeating that pattern. But as I can tell, nobody had that pattern memorized, right? Do you remember how else then we said the shortcut? Do you remember the shortcut way? Because the next thing we did was we took a number like I to the 19th, and we had to keep putting it in groups of 2, right? Because every one of those 2's was a -1. Remember doing that? And we said we didn't want to do that. You're right, Jackson. What did you do? You divide it by 2, and if this is a what? If it's an odd number, what happens? Then it's negative, and then if you have a remainder, if it's an odd number to begin with, then you have an I left over. It's either 1 or -1, depending on if this is an even or an odd number. So then we said something like I to the, I don't know, give me a number. 14th. If we really wanted to, that's I squared times 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 I squared. But that just means -1 times -1 times -1 times -1. So you take 14 and you divide by 2 and you get 7. You have an odd number, so your answer is -1.
When is it negative odd? If it's an even number.
No, if I had something like I to the 15th. Okay. So if I take 15 and divide by 2, what do you get? You get 7 and then remainder 1, right?
Yeah.
All right. 7 is a what? Odd number. So if I had 7 -1s, 7 negative numbers multiplied together is positive or negative? Negative. So it's negative. What's the remainder mean? You have an I left over. Because 15 divided by 2. We looked at an example. We said, what about I to the 19th? I to the 19th meant there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19 I's right there. So Eric, to answer that question right there, we wrote it all out. So I have my 19 I's accounted for. Each one of those I squareds became a -1. Who wants to write that on their paper every single time? I don't. So you look and you have an odd number of negatives, which is going to make it a negative, and you have that I left over. That's your remainder because you can't pair it with something. So we said the shortcut. Take 19 divided by 2, that gave you 9. You get that. Then we went through these examples. We said, what if it's I to the 38th? 38 divided by 2 is 19. There's no remainder, so it's either going to be 1 or -1. If it's a even exponent, your answer will be 1 or -1, depending on what half of that is. Half of that is an odd number, so it's -1. I to the 17th. 17 divided by 2 is 8. You have 1 left over, which is the I. 8 is an even number. You have 8 -1s that you're multiplying together, which is going to be positive 1I. I did not post this, Seaver, the other day when you subscribed. I thought I did too, but I'm not seeing it. Did I not post it on Facebook? I don't remember. I couldn't see it. I don't know. Here's one for you to do. Okay, so if that's the problem and I look at it, what's the highest power? Well, as you glance at that, you're going to say, nah, there's no like terms because I have I raised to the 4th, which is different than I to the 5th, which is different than I cubed, which is different than I squared. But you got to simplify them because what's the highest power I should occur to in your problem? To the first. Because we can take out pairs and make it a -1. So the first one, if you do it the long way, you're going to say 3i squared and I squared. There's the 4 i's accounted for. Each one of those is a -1. Others of you may do this. You're going to take 4 and divide by 2, which is what? 2. Even number, positive or negative? Positive. That simplifies to a 3. And you're going to skip that step right there. How many skip that? Anybody? Or you write it all out? So the next term you would do this, 2. There's 2, 4, 5. You would do that? Yes, Wilson. You can't. No. I missed him talking that way.
Can't get 10i to the 14th.
Nope, because what if they were x's? Can you take x squared plus x? No. They're not like terms. Otherwise, some of you are going to take 5 and divide by 2. That's 2 with the remainder. 2 is even or odd. Even, which means positive. Which when you simplify this, -1 times -1 is 1 times 2 is 2i. You go to the next term. It appears most of you are going to do this. I squared in I, which means 3 times -1 times I, which is -3i. So you look at this. You take the exponent, divide by 2, which gives you 1 with the remainder. This right here means positive or negative? -i. So you change the sign, tack on an I. Then you get plus 2i squared. I squared is the same thing as -1, so you get -2. Now, Landon, can you group like terms together?
Yeah.
Yes. What can we group together now? Those two, which give you -1i, and you can group these two together to give you 1. This is in the format of a plus bi. There's your answer right there.
1 minus I.
You may put 1 minus I because the one's understood to be as a coefficient.
Do you have to put the a plus bi form?
Format,
Yeah.
if they ask for it. So if I were to assign it in IXL, I believe they ask for it in that format. It's a confusing 2 slides, 3 slides. This slide.
Yeah. And then how do you put all that stuff up in like all that?
So I put the 2 i's together, which are right here, right? But you can't combine 2 radical 3 and 4 together because that's a rational and an irrational. So I just factored the I out. There is a possibility that you could just show it in this format. I would be perfectly fine with this right here for right now. I would be fine with it like that.
And if we just had like the one up there with 2i, 3, all that would be wrong.
It's okay for class-wise purpose. I would accept that. I'm just saying that a college professor might get picky and want it in a certain format. Be aware of that and don't say, well, Mrs. Schutz.
I haven't done it right here in college.
Just like an equation of a line can be y equals mx plus b, it can be y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. Several different ways to get there. They're both equations for lines. They can look totally different and still be the same equation for the same line. Another example. All right, here we go. First thing, what happens to this? It becomes an I. I'll move it in front if that's what you want. This right here is an I, and I'm going to change the color because this one right here is also an I. So see where those two I's come from. Square root of 4 is 2, so I'm going to put that 2 out in front. So you get 2I radical 3. If you want the I at the end, that's okay. Next one, I don't want that color. What does the square root of 9 become? 3. So I got to move that out in front, and 3 times 3 is 9. I times I is I squared, and then you're left with that square root of 2. Question up to that point. What happens with this right here? It becomes a -1, which changes that sign right there. So you're going to get 2I radical 3 minus 9 radical 2. If you want it in the format of A plus BI, -9 radical 2 plus 2I radical 3 will work. It doesn't mean that your I has to be at the end. So it doesn't mean you have to show it as 9 radical 2 plus 2 radical 3I, but you can. So either one of these two formats right here working with that I squared in your radicals. Here you go. Here's one more. Let's try 2, the square root of -2 times the square root of 2 plus 3I radical 2. Try that one. Okay, you look at it. What happens to this negative? Turns into an I, so I'm going to put the I there. What's radical 2 times radical 2? Just 2. What's 2 times 2? 4. So you get 4I. Can you do anything with that second term? Not really. You can. There's your answer. There's your answer.